Ani Kinawea, Midasa Disnakas, on the Kamnakani Donjaba, Dorum Patrick Madabi. I'll be moderating this session tonight. It's the third in our sessions of virtual meetings regarding a very important topic, citizenship. And this is the Lake Huron region, so welcome all you Lake Huron people from our various communities, one of the largest regions in the Anishinaabe Nation. Before we get started here, we'll show the agenda, please, Dion, and we'll begin in the proper way with Donna Davoski doing the Good Way When God's in Anishinaabe. Can you throw that agenda up there, please?
Yep, it's on there now.
Okay, I don't see it, but that's fine. Okay, go ahead, Donna, please.
For sure. Webdik kweden genin de gonni shabek kwenda gi gondo dema web shike genin engidot magna shinda genin Lake Huron binchaba nidom nesing kam function kade gini kabinch binchaba kabuni shinda shin kade kabinch kubni goa bon morgush minosh na stalin nakri shok pegi kaso geni gitsimak gini shinda nai kabit nakiat gino Miso chikwe migo chain de benjet, migo chananike kok misanik mishom sananik pik migo gino chipit go pik. Chibib said that chibito gino shikenda sick. When is such an but the motion that got chilla de when it gets in the minok the young ish not one kitchen stabe onanik. Mino and the kino and kita get me with chananik no shikina kiot. Tam the shmanika quake is man and go down gis in the stabe me Ekdaing gajam mounting marin starting mi mandan tam godan gis Anishinaabe. Devenchlet gisad Anishinaabe na king gibetun garden ne dort suin choden beke noden gibet was tonan minagdo en ming matishkak mekan. Devenchlet giminan get stoen dao Anishinaabe one nagdochen nandan nishosekin madwinen. Sagedwin, Debuewin, Saden moin, Bukawin, Paden diswin, Quetzwin, Minoshak dewin. Devenchket Kimin Unaded the Nevin of Twin, Kavnaden Danaga Bishwebak, Minogan Nagomego Shwebak, Minoshke Yabewan Shwebak. Midishmando gay nation, Miguet and Ming Panem, Magash, Miguet in Gagin, with the Schmiguet Chickading,
Miguet, Donna. So, folks, tonight we've got a couple of objectives. We want to bring to your attention, the Anishinaabe Nation and the citizens of the various regions within the Anishinaabe are trying to focus on the development of declaration on our citizenship, Eben Dogjajik, those that belong. And that's a very important objective because we are the only ones that have the right to determine our citizenship. And the government is back to tinkering around with the Indian Act to create something called a two-parent rule, of which you'll get some more information shortly. But it basically is a terrible another attempt of tinkering that doesn't do anything but delay the elimination of our people by another generation. So we've been developing a one-parent rule, a one-parent law that we're going to talk about tonight. And but more importantly, why we're talking about a declaration is to tell the government in no uncertain terms to stay out of the business of trying to say who our people are. A duck is a duck, a moose is a moose, and a Anishinaabe is an Anishinaabe. And I don't know why the government continues to try to change who we are. Of course, they're trying to assimilate us and just make us ordinary Canadians without our inherent rights. And that's part of what this is all about, is maintaining and protecting our inherent rights. So we're going to lay out that objective of putting a declaration forward to the government to preempt their process of consultation with communities on their two-parent rule. I guess another objective I would state tonight is when you hear about tonight's information, it will be followed up, on a website, and information will be there. Talk to your friends and talk to your family about this, and talk to your leadership about how important it is, to deal with this citizenship issue. We have to occupy the field here of determining our citizenship, not the government. So to that end, I'm going to introduce the Lake Huron Regional Grand Chief, Scott McLeod. He's been a long-time chief at Nipissing First Nation. Currently with the Nishnawbek Nation, he holds the Intergovernmental Affairs portfolio, Natural Resources portfolio, and he deals with Aboriginal treaty rights in a number of sectors. An avid sportsman himself, hunter and fisherman, so he's out in the land. He knows what we're talking about here intimately when we're talking about protecting rights. So with that, Lake Huron Regional Grand Chief McLeod.
Miigwech Pat. Anin kinawe Zongabwe Dijnakaz Bizing Dunjaba. Thanks for the opening and thanks for the invite to come and speak and be one of the panelists tonight. One of the things that I want to stress upon everybody, and I know this because I was involved over the last probably about 2 years, maybe a little bit longer, with Nipissing, where we undertook our citizenship law under the NAGA, the Anishinaabe Nation Governance Agreement. And it was, it was kind of seemed like, okay, yeah, this is another thing to do. But once we started getting into it, and as Pat mentioned, I worked in I worked with the Chiefs of Ontario as well as Wawinamagawin, the treaty organization, and now the Anishinaabe Nation as a regional chief. Just how impactful citizenship is, and how important it is for us to get a hold of determining who our citizens are. One of the glaring examples that I found over my work with the Métis Nation of Ontario and their assertions within our territory is I've learned that originally the original organization came out of the fact that a lot of our communities were shattered from the Indian Act going back almost 2 centuries. And what I mean by that is because of the what Pat talked about, the 6162 rules within the Indian Act to determine our citizens and how it was kind of engineered to basically eradicate us through legislation, and therefore, eliminating the responsibility, the fiduciary responsibility that Canada had towards Indigenous people. That was the main goal. So as a result, there was a lot of our members who were basically out in limbo as a result, because they weren't, our band members, so to speak, under the Indian Act. And so they were looking for, a sense of belonging. And quite frankly, some of our communities probably turned them away because they didn't have status. And so they needed a place to go to feel like they belonged. They needed, that connection to Anishinaabe. And so the MNO in its infancy was a place for non-status. It was literally where our people went to feel connected. And even though they weren't recognized under the federal government, the Indian Act, they still had a sense of belonging to something that was Indigenous. And so that kind of mutated over generations. As a result, anybody that had some connection to Indigenous ancestry now feels, emboldened by the fact that this was really just, a place where our people who got displaced could go. But it has morphed into this organization, representing anybody with, a drop of Anishinaabe blood and may have no connection. And in many cases, they didn't even have a drop of blood. It was just a way of gaining some type of recognition and benefits from that. So all this to say, this was created by, the MNO today was created by the Indian Act. And it was done so because we didn't have control of our citizenship. So it was a place to go, and it became, questionable whether there's, actually Indigenous people in that organization. Most of what I've seen now have made their way back into our communities through in 1982, or was it 1980? Bill C-34, I believe it was, who got their status back. They have made it back onto our ban lists, but there's still many that are trying to regain status. As a result, the MNO went from this whole representation of non-status to them being a Métis organization, because they just simply said, well, if you have Native ancestry, therefore you have mixed blood, and mixed blood means Métis. And we all know that that's not true. But the importance is that once we all the First Nations in Ontario gain back their citizenship, we basically are eliminating that space of where they can claim this legitimate claim to be Indigenous. So, and we don't have that right now. So we can't say that they're our members, at least in the eyes of the government. So the good thing is that, we do have the Anishinaabe Nation Governance Agreement that allows us to take control of that. And once we start bringing our people back who we deem to be our citizens, then we can have them on our ban lists. And the ones that don't, under our criteria, are simply Ontario or Canadian residents. Like they don't have any other status. But right now, as long as we don't have control, we're allowing these fake organizations fill that space, and that's why it's so important for us to determine who our citizens are. But I'm not going to kid you, it's very, very complex, and it's a lot of work, but that should not deter us from doing the work that needs to be done, because at the end of the day, we need to determine who our citizens are, not Ontario, not Canada, nobody else except for our nations. So miigwech for that, and looking forward to having more discussion on this very important matter.
Miigwech, Regional Chief. I just want to let the participants know out there in virtual land, we're going to have a couple of more presenters, and after each presenter, we'll take some time to flag any questions or issues you have. You can put them in the chat for now, and we'll take some time to review those questions. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So at this juncture, we've had a real champion of rights, especially women's rights, for many, many years. She's a citizen of Okomakong and ceded territory, has received many awards and honorary doctorates for her lifelong work to protect the rights of Anishinaabe women and children. And in the early 2000s, 2007, 2009, she was commissioned as a commissioner of citizenship, Ibindogzijig, which means those who belong. She went out, her and Mary Laurent and other staff went out to the communities and met with citizens and leaders to look at developing Ibindogzijig Nagewin, which was ratified by the Anishinaabe Nation Grand Council. So the citizenship law was our response to the second generation cutoff and loss, of our citizens through the loss of the Indian Act status, like Regional Chief McLeod was talking about. And there's many examples of the government ever since, Canada was formed in in 1867, they used the Indian residential school system. They've used, you're deemed to be civilized if you got an education, therefore lost your status. How you married determined your status. There was many forms of, the 69 white paper was an assimilation attempt to get rid of us. When the constitutional talks happened, they were trying to eliminate our rights, and and the UNDRIP declaration was brought forward, and Canada was one of the three nations that didn't ratify it originally. So there's been many times where they've been trying to do this, and all through those years, there's been court challenges with the tinkering that they've been doing on trying to eliminate our people or water down, the rights so that there's eventual elimination. And Jeanette was at the forefront. Dr. Jeanette Coibier-Lavelle was at the forefront of fighting to make sure that we didn't lose these rights. And so we're building a consensus. This declaration I spoke about those who belong, as citizens of our community. So Dr. Jeanette Coibier-Lavelle is going to speak to you about this process that she was involved in, and what we're doing to, I guess, take a proactive approach and preempt the government's tinkering again, so that we come out of this shoot solid, and we can't afford to lose another Anishinaabe. These are our families, and that's goes to the crux of the whole matter. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jeanette Coibier-Lavelle. Can you unmute her, please? Deanne? There we go. Okay.
Okay. Miigwech, Pat. Just before I get into the rest, what I want to share with you, I just want to say that I'm on my way home from Vancouver. I was at a meeting there looking at the Indian Act again. And this is, I've been dealing with this for 55 years now, and we're still needing to do lots of work on it. But along the way, I am here in southeastern Ontario, and the power is out, and it's like back the old days where we have to use generators. Prior to that, I guess we didn't need that, but just to bear with me if something does happen. But we will carry on. Ahaw. Gamachta. Ani kinawaya. Kiwed nangenindishnikas, nishnabay kwendao. We come kongan see the territory, mishe nungo and the dom the sing at them kadeke get no them. Up to kitchen and the minoge semagok in a way. Mountain ding mumpy be up con sing we know the main, ani a joevok. Mabak chigema one knockany get me no. Me were 10 minutes that she gagi no we in the make nungunakshik. I just want to say that I'm really pleased that we have so many of our Ed Ben-Dowsajik online tonight to get the latest that's happening with our piece of legislation, ours as well as the government, because the government right now is putting lots of money into still looking at that legislation called the Indian Act, and they want to continue to make it so that it is going to really be restricting us and who our people are. So let's just keep that in mind, that the Indian Act wasn't designed to help us, and it wasn't designed to be of any support to us as a nation. So what I would like to do is, before I actually get into the collaborative process and the second generation cutoff and all that corresponds with that, is just take a few minutes and share with you what I've learned during the course of my research and my work with not only the Anishinaabe Nation, but with other organizations and Indigenous women's organizations. And that is, it's come to my attention that we have been here on this continent that we call Turtle Island, and others call it North America. But I remember people talking about, well, we've always been here. And I think we know that some of our great orators, our great Gimhawk, they would talk about our own governance, our ways, our teachings, and the fact that we have been here since time immemorial. And to me, that word time immemorial, it was so vast. But in fact, now we're finding out it's true because it has been shared and it is documented and researched. One of our women is an archaeologist, and she is working in North America here, in Canada, as well as in the part that's called the United States. And they're uncovering artifacts that are dating back 60,000 years for sure. Now, she is saying that this is only the beginning, and we can go back to maybe 100,000 years, maybe even more than that. So this reflects on what our stories, our legends have been telling us. That's a long, long time. And we didn't come across the Bering Strait, and this is what the white academics are trying to tell us. Well, they're scientists, but we know that they're not going to really be sharing us what is being discovered. So we're going to have to do a lot of our own work. And I appreciate that this woman, her name is Paulette Steeves, I believe. And, just to encourage our young people, we have to document our own history and our own teachings. But anyways, to move forward, we all know that the Indian Act, and I said this already, it's not there for us. It's a form of genocide meant to do away with us. And there's other people who could talk about that, like Duncan Campbell Scott, where deliberately it was meant to erase us. And here we are again in this day and age. And we're going to have to be really supportive of each other. We look at our ancestors, our people, the Gimhawk, who signed those treaties. Those treaties, all the people had voice, when our people gathered together. And this is where that term consensus came from. But everyone was involved in giving our leadership, this is the direction, this is what you're going to be saying as what our concerns are. And that's what happened with the treaties. And now we're finding out that they weren't honored many times. And so now we have this legislation called the Indian Act. The Indian Act then is been challenged quite a few times, and it was successful when it was Indians and drinking, having access to alcohol. But here we are, Section 12(1)(b), and I've been dealing with that, as I said, for 55 years now. And after all this time, I believe it was mentioned that in 1985, I was able to get my status back to my community. And that was through the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But that took many, many resources and so much hardships and turmoil to even get that. And then the Indian Act, it's been changed bit by other people, other women made attempts to change it as well. So it has been undergoing piecemeal, bit by bit, because, as I said, it is a racist document. Genocidal document, I guess, is the proper way of saying it, to do away with us. But thank goodness the Anishinaabe Nation, quite a few years ago, after we had our own constitution, and when we looked at nationhood, nations have people, nations have lands, nations have language and culture and governance. We had all that. and it was taken away bit by bit. And now our people are realizing the importance. We are going to have to really put some hard work into bringing that about again, because the first aspect of taking away someone's sovereignty, someone's sovereign rights to governance, is to do away with the people. And this is the first thing that the current Indian Act collaborative process is doing, is just trying to once again do away with our people. And as I said, I challenged the Indian Act many, many years ago. And now we're dealing with this collaborative process on the second generation cutoff. Now, instead of just having one way of doing away with our status, now we have two aspects. It affects both men and women now, where that will come to an end. So it's double discriminatory now, the way that the government is planning on proceeding. And we will need to really be strong and determined. And the only way we can do this is by taking back our own governance, and some of our First Nations are already doing that. And we can do it if we could continue on with the PowerPoint here. Okay. So after looking at our Constitution, and then I was asked to be the Nigan Wedot Edbendagzijik, that's the Commissioner on Citizenship, or the right to belong. And that word Edbendagzijik came from our own people, came from a First Nation close by here. The chief at the time, Keith Knott, he was working with us at the Union of Ontario Indians, and he came up with that word. We have to start using our own language as well, because it is so much more relevant to who we are as a people. So now we have Edbendagzijik Nakanigewan, that's our citizenship law. And within that Edbendagzijik Nakanigewan, after consultation, Mary and I went to quite a few communities, and everyone stressed to us the importance of belonging, and that we recognize our own people. We know who our people are. And the decision was that it should be through one parent, and not what is currently being proposed, which is going to be two parents. So you can see what is happening. But after we have done the one parent at the Bendagzijik Nakanigewan, and we have that in draft form, and it is available, you can get access to it. But we are also recognizing what is happening on the outside societies, the outside governments, and they're really pushing so that they want to do away with us. And so even though we are working together and we have our Anishinaabe Nation Constitution, it was decided not too long ago, at the end of January, in fact, we all came together in Bauteng to come up with our own Edbendagzijik Declaration. And this is what you see in front of you, Anishinaabe Declaration on Edbendagzijik. It's in draft form. But all those who were attending at that time, we talked about it, the importance, and the fact that it is our inherent right to be able to make decisions for ourselves. And that is a key point of nationhood, is to determine your own citizens. All the other countries in the world can do that. So we definitely need to stress that we are a nation and we will determine who our people are. And this is going to be the Anishinaabe Declaration on Edbendagzijik, and we will be unified in promoting this and supporting it. So after our discussion in Bauteng, we came up with 7 strong points. And what you see in front of you is just in English, but at the end, you will be able to see, we took all this English words in those points and put them into the Schnabelman, and it's much more relevant, and you'll be able to feel the meaning and the passion that went into drafting that. But I'll start right now. Number one, as I said, this came from our people who were there. Young, old, young people were there, the youth, and everyone participated. So the Creator placed the Anishinaabe on earth along with the gift of spirituality. And you all know how important that is to have our own spirituality. The Creator gave us sovereignty to govern ourselves. We belong to the land and we follow our own laws. All our people, and we feel it in our hearts, that sense of belonging. If we are Anishinaabe, we know we are part of the land. That is who we are. And no matter what or where we are, we have that longing to return to where we came from, to that land. And that is another key aspect of Edibendausichik. We have the right to determine who our people are. Obviously, that should be one of our key aspects, and we should really be implementing and telling anyone who wants to tell us otherwise, and I'm speaking specifically of government, the Indigenous Services Canada, that we are the only ones who should have that right to determine who are people. No one else will do that to any other nation. So definitely we need to have that right. And right now we are going with the one parent rule. Through our own governance principles and structures, we decide who belong. And once again, when we look at that one, our elders and our teachers, our people who are in our communities, they have been sharing the clan systems and through our language and how we relate to each other, how we are responsible for each other. And that comes through the clans as well, and those teachings. Number 6, together, all of us, we take care of each other. The earth, the water, air, fire, and all our relations. There it is, who can argue with that? All the elements of what we've been given by the Creator, and then all the other living beings that are placed on this earth, on this beautiful land, for us all to be together and to relate together in a positive way. So there it is, it says it right there. Number 7, we assert and exercise our inherent right of self-determination for the protection of our lands and our Edibendausichik, as affirmed by the Anishinaabe Nation Edibendausichik Naknigemen, and that was done in 2008. So that has been there. We've known the importance, and we maybe haven't been putting as much emphasis on it. But especially now in this time of the history of all the settlers coming here and the colonizers, we really need to be strong about this and assert that we're going to work with our own Edibendausichik Naknigewen and have that sense of unity so we can all really feel and support that. Now, if we continue, as I said, these declarations then will be in Anishinaabe as well. The addendum following that, there were so many other good aspects of who we are as a people that we included them in the addendum. Once again, this is just draft. And it reinforces the previous 7. We have been on this land and governed this land since time immemorial. Our treaty rights shall be protected and practiced by Edibendausichik, and that's us. Edibendausichik, we belong. Edibendausichik, all of the other people who belong. We will assert our totemic system and adoption laws according to our kinships and customs, with the key principles of inclusion and equality. We do not want to be losing our people anymore. That has been going on far too long. We will be able to bring them back. They are our people, they're our relatives, they're our kin, and they have that right to belong to the Anishinaabe Nation, to our communities, and that connection to the land, so they can come back and at the end of our time here on this land, they can be buried with their ancestors on the land that they were born into. We will reinforce our traditional governance, principles, and structures. That's the work we're all going to have to be doing, and we can do it because the resources are there. We have the elders, we know about the principles, and we also know we've been taught more and more recently how all those clans and the principles and the structures, how they all interact. So that's also available. We will continue to teach our children our laws and traditional ways as Anishinaabe to protect the seventh generation. And we talk about this, our people, especially our grandmothers and the women and the elders, about how it's a key responsibility to think about, prepare, and have that information so that it will carry on to all the next generations to come, to the seventh generation even. Some more important aspects of this. As the Anishinaabe people, we unite to address the changing landscapes of external government policies as they affect the Anishinaabe Nation, our land rights, and our inherent rights. We want to practice that. That's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to really take a good stance on the Indian Act the way it is, because it's an external government policy and it is affecting, it's been dividing us, it's causing heartbreak and hardship. That shouldn't happen anymore. And we have our inherent rights that we must practice. We will continue to practice and protect our spiritual laws, as this is our connection to Creator, and this is who we are. Well, of course, it's key in all of us. We have that within us, we're born into it, the connection to the land. With the land comes that spirituality and all the other aspects that are around us and will continue. And we have to teach this and share it with our children. Lastly, but it's also very important, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, called UNDRIP. It reinforces our inherent right of self-determination. Now, many of our people worked on that declaration. It's there, it's available to us. Canada initially didn't support it, but because I think they were shamed into actually adopting it, so they did. And it is there now. And further, we don't have time to really get into it, but if you see on the bottom of this page here, there's articles 3, 4, 8, 9, 33, 39, 42, 46. If you want, I believe it will be available on our website. Those are all key. We can use that to state to the government, current government right now, that it's relevant, and we have to, they have to listen, and they must reinforce that we are a nation and this is our right to do it, our inherent right. So before I say sign off, I just want to share with all of you the extreme importance right now, because as you know, when we look at the political landscape, election has been called, and we've been hearing about the two big political parties of the governments that are in Canada right now, the settler governments, I guess I'll say. But if we look at past history, I remember when we had the Kelowna Accord, and that was under the Liberal government, and there were 5 aspects of that, I believe. And it was so good. It had to do with determining our citizenship, our land, education, health, and it was going to be exciting if it had been passed. Unfortunately, at the time, that's when the Conservative government came in under the last government Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. First thing that was done was to wipe that whole Kelowna Accord out, and we had to deal with that. And we are still dealing with repercussions from that disappointing action by the Conservative government. So right now, here we are, and we're in that same dilemma. If it happens that a different government comes in, and we've heard some comments already, and I was at another gathering, a political gathering, and it's how am I going to say this now without getting myself into difficulty, but just keep in mind, I guess, what happened the last time that government took over the Indian Act, the legislation. And if we're put in that situation, it's going to be really, really difficult. The other thing is because of UNDRIP, the government, and this has been told us loud and clear, the next government, they're going to definitely, because they're following UNDRIP, they're going to take any discrimination out of the Indian Act, which means that they're just going to do away with the Indian Act and all the other aspects, because there's still some good in it, but they just say, well, it'll be wiped out. Then what are we going to have? And they said, well, then you want to be like all the other Canadians, you'll have that equality. But we have our special laws, those treaties, and that's what they want to negate. So keep that in mind. So I'll close on that basis, but just say we have the rest of April to really be thinking about what our part in this election process is going to be. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat or you can call in today. Miigwech, Ibzadueg.
Okay, thank you, Jeanette Chimigwech, for that. And just to be very clear, you folks that are on the Zoom here, the more time-sensitive issue is us ratifying and getting consensus on this declaration. It's a strong statement to the government to state our position that we are the only ones that have the right to determine our citizenship. We've done this in the past during the constitutional talks. The Declaration of Our Nations was come out of our region here and was passed and was adopted even nationally. So this is how important these declarations are, sending a strong, strong message to the government to stop tinkering with our citizenship law. Now, on the matter of citizenship laws in each of your communities, we still have more time to work on that for a very robust, in-depth discussion in each community. And, that could take, even several years. But I just wanted to be clear, this declaration is more time sensitive because the government is moving with their legislation very shortly, maybe as soon as the fall, or it could be sooner. And we want to get ahead of that game. But the more important work we've got to do in our development of our citizenship laws, every citizen in our communities will have some time, to participate in that in a more fulsome discussion. We're going to open it up for a few minutes for some questions. If there's any questions, anything on the chat already, you could let us know, Dave. Anything on there yet?
No, not yet. But
Okay.
it's open for folks.
Anybody live want a question? Okay, we'll move on. Keep your questions handy. Put them in the chat. Or okay, Regional Chief McLeod, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a stickler on this point, and in our declaration on the second last page, we should never refer to us having treaty rights. It should always be inherent rights protected by treaty. Every time we say that, it gives the connotation that somehow the Crown gave us rights. It's important to distinguish that those rights were prior to any treaty. They existed since time immemorial. So that's the importance of calling them inherent rights. So I just wanted to if we reference treaty at all, we should be talking about treaty protected rights. And so, you know, that's the whole idea of the treaty. That's just, you know, the treaty, we put too much emphasis on the treaty as being part of our rights, and it's not. It was really just outlining our relationship between the Crown and ourselves, and it was there to protect the rights that we already had. So I just want to make that.
Well, thank you for that. And that's exactly why we're having these sessions, is for people to take a look at where we can improve the declaration and where we can improve any of the work that we're doing. And you're absolutely correct. Nations make treaties. You know, the treaties aren't something that somebody gave us. You know, we made these treaties when it was appropriate, but above all, we've always had our inherent rights given to us by the Creator. Anyone else on the chat, or anyone else have a question?
That's good to recognize and know. Yeah.
Now, okay, I think we're going to move on. I don't see any questions in the chat or any questions. We got to make up a little bit of time anyway. So our next presenter is also a regional chief for the Southeast region, Regional Chief Marcia Smoke, and she's been around for a number of years on the political scene, quite an entrepreneur over the years, and she's a strong spokesperson with you know, the citizenship Ibn-Dagji portfolio, as well as you know, some of the lands and resources portfolios and other work that she does with our leadership council, working with our Grand Council chief. So really happy to that she's now you know, working with the Southeast region chiefs and working with all the Anishinaabe regions, and she's going to give us an overview. Sort of, we have to know what they're doing, what the federal government's doing, and so that you're aware, you know, the dangers and the pitfalls of that. And you know, Jeanette has talked about the solutions, about putting out a strong declaration, about developing our own citizenship laws. But you should also be aware of what the opposition, the federal government, the enemy is doing as well. And Marcia will give you an overview of some of the tinkering that they're doing. So I'll turn it over to you, Marcia.
Ani Bosho Kwe, Higani Makwa Kwe Indishnakas, Makwan Dodam, Pamadesh Goreyang, and Unjaba. Ani Kenawaya, good evening. Miigwet, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction. I'm coming to you from Alderville First Nation. We're in my home community. We are actually experiencing the power outages from the ice storm for the last few days. We haven't had hydro since Saturday, and we're all working off generators and running to get water from the spring from the community down the road. So we're back to square one, if I might say. But I also want to say that many of our communities are declaring a state of emergency, and I certainly offer my prayers and to those communities that to help them get through this difficult situation.
Okay, so let's jump right into the presentation, Marcia.
Yep. The role that I have as a portfolio holder on citizenship for the Anishinaabe Nation is timely. It's something that has been in my sights over my entire lifetime. Spending time on citizenship falls in line with what I was taught, and that is to never leave anyone behind. After the interventions and lifelong work of our Commissioner, Jeanette Corbière-Lavelle, and ongoing court challenges, we are still living with federal legislation that continues to exclude members of our families, denying them the ability to exercise their inherent rights and our constitutional rights. The second generation cutoff in the Indian Act legislation continues to leave many of our relatives behind And as time goes on, more and more of our family members are being excluded. The work that we are doing here will continue to set the framework that will bring our relatives back into our family circles. And there are two issues at hand here. The first issue is that we need to be mindful that we have many court cases and human rights challenges to the Indian Act as far back as the 1970s that our women have won. And those challenges will forever remain on record that supports the recognition of our rights. With those wins in court, the Anishinaabe Nation has continued its involvement over the decades. And although she has been involved her entire life, over the last 15 plus years, work has continued under the Anishinaabe Nation Citizenship Commissioner, Jeanette Corbière-Laval. The second issue is with respect to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, known as UNDRIP. It was adopted by the United Nations in 2007, but not by Canada. In 2016, the UNDRIP was finally adopted here in this country. In 2019, Bill C-15 was created to bring about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. That bill was in part meant to align Canadian laws affecting First Nations with the UN Declaration. The Indian Act is one of those laws. When this bill received royal assent in 2021, the government proceeded to identify all of those pieces of legislation that affects us. And from there, they created the UNDRIP Action Plan. So this action plan would essentially implement the government's UNDRIP Act. And that's where we are now. Under the UNDRIP Act and the action plan, the government has taken the position that they want to do what they are supposed to be doing. So creating the collaborative process on the second generation cutoff and Section 10 voting thresholds of the Indian Act are part of this process. What they have said, but are not widely publicizing, is that the collaborative process is meant to replace the sections related to membership in the Indian Act for all. While we are participating in this collaborative process, it's very important that we don't forget about the court cases that were won, because those are recognizing our inherent rights. I say this because Canada's agenda is more aligned with the UNDRIP Act and the action plan that they created, and it's not based on the actual UNDRIP or the court cases. In fact, Canada is proposing, as part of their internal work, citizenship will be based on a two-parent rule and just delays the second generation cutoff to another time down the road. Their intent is still to get rid of us. They have put some timelines on how they are going to proceed, and right now we are on phase 2 of the collaborative process. Please keep in mind that Canada wants to wrap up this work by the winter of 2027. Now, as we proceed, this work is not unfamiliar to First Nations. As recent as 2018, the Minister's Special Representative traveled across the country to hear the views of First Nations. In reviewing the proceedings of those meetings, 37 of the 39 Anishinaabe Nation communities participated in the meetings held across Ontario. Those meetings consulted on reforming Indian Act status, band membership, and First Nation citizenship. Since then, many questions have arisen from both the government and First Nations. We want to know what kind of effect an influx of new members will have on our communities. Right now, even though we are estimating that around 300,000 additional members will be added to our First Nations nationally, the estimate is actually between 270,000 to 400,000. So along with that comes the bigger questions of funding required to support new members coming into our First Nation communities, our land base, housing and infrastructure, the impacts on health and education, and so much more. Those are questions that have been out there for quite some time. There are also questions that were there when Bill C-31 was enacted and put in place in 1985. So we are now in a place where we are engaging with First Nations, and we have a number of tools that we are working on. Both Patrick and our commissioner spoke of these, but I want to repeat them just as a reminder as we move forward. So number one, we have resolutions from the Anishinaabe Nation Chiefs in Assembly many years ago to mandate us to deal with membership. Number two, we have a citizenship law that was developed and adopted in 2009. The Anishinaabe Nation Citizenship Law, known as the Edibandog-Zijignak-Nagawan, is a framework that was established to guide Anishinaabe First Nations in determining their own citizenship laws, emphasizing the inherent right of self-determination and addressing issues arising from Canada's control over Indian status. It is also where the Anishinaabe First Nations adopted the one-parent rule for determining who our members are. And the third point is that we now have the declaration that was created on January 29th, 2025 in Sault Ste. Marie, where many First Nations were in attendance. Jeanette just presented this just before my role here. So how we got this declaration is that we went around the room at the meeting and we asked participants what was important to them to have in a draft declaration. And this is what the outcome was. What we committed to was to taking the comments back and put them into a draft declaration, and then hold virtual sessions for each of the regions to make sure that we captured the essence of people's comments. This is where we're at today. And we will bring this document to the Grand Council Assembly in June for the chiefs to consider for adoption. This declaration is meant to be a framework or guiding principles that you can consider when it's time to do your work in the communities. And this is also where I appreciate the comments from Regional Chief McLeod, because they will also be included in the as we move forward. So I want to now emphasize that the community work is where all the details will have to be worked out. And this is not new information either. As I mentioned earlier, in 2018, First Nations participated in the consultation with Canada's special representative, and a lot of the concerns and issues were raised back then. All of those comments are documented, and they're all available on the Indian Affairs website. So if you want to refer back and look at what those to give you a start on your discussions in your community, you have a list there that is has a lot of detail. And this was probably the most recent work that First Nations were involved in the citizenship issue. We are at a stage now where we need to share the information. We want you to have some tools available to support creating your own citizenship law. And what that means is the Anishinaabe Nation is not the one who will be writing up who your members are. That's work that has to be undertaken in your communities. Some of the topics that you'll want to address are gender roles, adoption, birthing, deaths, marriage, dotem, belonging, family compositions, kinship, intertribal transfers, and cross-border recognition. And I just want to add that genealogy will play a big role as you begin to as you create and also implement your citizenship law. So this is not a one-size-fits-all citizenship law. Every community has its own unique circumstances, and while there may be some similarities, not every law will be the same. That is why it's very important that the conversations take place in your community to deal with these kinds of situations. It's also important to understand that we have a lot of developments across Ontario, specifically where our First Nations are impacted and we need to take control of our citizenship. Lake Huron Regional Chief Scott McLeod spoke well of this, and I appreciate all the information that he shared. We have those issues with the assertions with the Métis Nation of Ontario, but I was also reminded at our Southeast virtual meeting that we have to include the Algonquins of Ontario, those who cannot prove their ancestry. And we now also have a whole influx of individuals who are self-identifying as Indigenous. So we need to face this work head on and create a strong citizenship law that is in the best interests of our communities and relatives. I want to move on to the presentation slides now, the one that just flipped up before with the circles. And the first one shows this one here. Yes, this one shows how the Indian Act status currently works. The terms 6.1 and 6.2 are what we are familiar with. So as we go through this chart, we can see that a 6.1 parent and a 6.1 parent means that the child will have 6.1 status. Similarly, with 6.1 and 6.2, we'll have a 6.1 status child. 6.2 and 6.2 status parents will have a 6.1 status child. And this is where we start to lose status. A 6.1 status person and a parent with no status, the child then becomes registered as a 6.2. And then a 6.2 parent with no, and a parenting with no status, the child has no status. So that brings us right to the bottom of the chart. What is generally not known is there are 14 different categories, and it's on another slide here, that 14 different categories of 6.1, and this is it here. And that is information that you might want to review. And these are the details as to why we see so much disparity in who can pass on status in families, and where we see siblings who cannot, and they don't understand why their sister or brother can pass on their status to their child and grandchild, and then they can't. So this is a good overview here. It's a little bit could be a little bit complicated to read, but it's there for your information. So these charts are available, and I encourage you to make copies and review them as you do your work in your communities. And also it's good for members to, or those who are not members yet, but believe they're entitled to be members, should have a look at these slides and familiarize themselves with them. So once we start to work with the one parent rule, there is some certainty that our children will continue to be a part of our Anishinaabeg family for generations to come. So now I want to talk just briefly about Bill C-38, and it's on the in the midst of another slide here. There we are. So this is one piece of unfinished business that I would like to address. And Bill C-38 is legislation that was tabled in Parliament in 2022, and it was intended to address enfranchisement. Enfranchisement is a policy under the Indian Act that removes status of individuals who served in the military, obtained a university degree, or for other reasons who chose to be enfranchised, and for women who married someone who was enfranchised. The children were automatically removed from the Indian register or not entitled to be registered upon birth. So there were other provisions in Bill C-38 which included voluntary registration, deregistration, and enabling women who were automatically transferred to their husband's ban on marriage to allow them to be able to return to their original community along with their children. But due to the prorogation of Parliament, Bill C-38 will now have to be reintroduced in Parliament, if that's even possible, depending on who is in the next government. So the importance of Bill C-38 is, rather than going through these membership processes, full status would be provided to individuals who lost their status due to enfranchisement. We don't want to have those enfranchised citizens to have them wrapped up in the second generation cutoff under the collaborative process. So there are presently approximately 3,500 people across the country who would be entitled to be registered under Bill C-38 or the new legislation as it comes forward. So before I leave this part of the presentation on second generation cutoff, I want to leave you with this message. I believe we have to move forward with a position of inclusion rather than exclusion. And that follows my teachings of don't leave anyone behind. Through all of this, the Indian Act and any attempts to bring our relatives back into the circle, some have already been left behind. So the next part has to do with the Section 10 voting thresholds, and they're all slides that I'm going to just go through one at a time, and they're all straightforward. I really appreciate that the staff have put this into point form because it sure makes my life a lot easier if I could just read what's on the slides. So Section 10 voting thresholds, the issue refers to the double majority vote required for First Nations in their transition from Section 10, Section 11 to Section 10 under the Indian Act. But before I really get into it, I just want to explain a couple things. Under Section 11 of the Indian Act, the government is still determining who our citizens are. Section 10 of the Indian Act are those First Nations who have chosen to create their own membership codes and be the ones who determine who their members are. The difference between Section 10 and Section 11 is anyone who is added to membership under Section 10, they are provided with membership, but they may not have Indian status. The government is still implicating themselves in our membership. This is why we have to get it right. So now I'll go over all the slides on the screen and point as these points are all right on. There's I don't have to do any other comments about them. So I'll start again. Section 10 voting thresholds refer to the double majority vote required for First Nations to transition from Section 10 to from Section 11 to Section 10 under the Indian Act. When transitioning to Section 10, First Nations can take control over their membership by establishing their own rules and codes. The introduction of Bill C-31 in 1985 created two options for controlling band membership. Section 10 and 11 of the Indian Act, making registration and membership distinct. So the department cannot add members to the First Nation list for those who have assumed control under Section 10. Membership is determined by the First Nation. Acceptance to a First Nation band that determines their own membership is dependent on the membership rules established by the band. For those First Nations, a registered person under the Indian Act who is or is not affiliated to them may or may not be recognized as a band member. A band member affiliated to a First Nation that controls membership may or may not be registered under the Indian Act. So that was Section 10. Now, under Section 11, First Nations that have not been able to take control of their band membership under Section 10, their band membership lists are maintained by Indigenous Services Canada. Once a person is registered to a Section 11 band, they are automatically added to the band's membership. So for a First Nation to transition to take control of their membership under Section 10, specific requirements must be fulfilled, particularly obtaining consent from eligible electors. Currently, and this is where the voting threshold comes in, currently, consent is obtained only upon meeting a double majority voting threshold. This means that a majority of the electors must participate in a vote, and a majority must vote in favor. So only 2 First Nations have successfully completed the process in the past 10 years. And this is partly due to challenges in meeting that double majority voting threshold. As a potential solution to the second generation cutoff may result in an additional 225,000 or more newly entitled individuals over time, it is necessary to consult whether an amendment to the existing structure and process is desired. An influx of new members will likely make it more difficult for bands to gain consent if they're eligible electors to transition to Section 10 as per the current double majority voting thresholds. So that's the end of my presentation. I appreciate the time the extra time that I was allowed to be able to get through all of this. I'll pass it back to our chairman, Patrick.
Okay, Miigwech, thank you, Marcia. Dave, has there been any questions in the chat or anybody want to say something or ask a question live?
Miigwech, Pat. There was a question, but we had some answers within the chat to the question.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you want me to read through the question and the answer, or do we want to?
Well, why don't you do that? I think for the participants to see what went on.
Yes. Okay. So there was a question from, do all the UNDRIP referenced articles specifically only to self-determination? So within the PowerPoint, there was a question or a statement regarding the UNDRIP articles. So there was an answer. The sharing of the actual draft declaration and the UNDRIP was also shared. And then the second question was also, when and how will the ratification and consensus be achieved on the draft declaration? Is it time sensitive? So there were some answers provided. The hope is that the declaration to be adopted by the Chiefs and Assembly at the upcoming Grand Council. I also noted that there is, of the 4 regional sessions this is the 3rd one. There's going to be a 4th one for the Northern Superior regional communities. And then it's going to be shared at the upcoming 4 regional chiefs meetings before it gets to the Grand Council for its adoption. So, and the one point that was made to the question was, we're trying to build consensus and inspire communities to adopt it as the preamble to their nation's citizenship laws, and to engender discussion on citizenship from a cultural perspective and based on inherent rights. So that was the questions and the answers, Patrick.
Okay, Miigwech. Anyone else come up on the chat yet, or is anybody who have a question live? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to our next presentation. And folks, if you think of something, after the session is over, or when you're chatting amongst your folks that you're with or your neighbors, you can always ask questions. We're going to give a contact person here at the end. Well, that's on there right now. Laurent.mary.gmail, I think it is. I didn't catch the whole thing, but it's on there, and you can we'll get responses to you. So even if you don't get a chance or you can't think of something right at the moment, Mary Laurent will be available. She worked with our Citizenship Commissioner, Dr. Corbier Laval, and we have a backup staff in the governance component that can respond to any questions you have out there. So I think we'll move on. We have Megan Goulet. She is been working with Nipissing First Nation for some time now, and I understand as of today, I didn't catch the whole conversation, but you have a new title. But she's been doing a lot of work on the governance components, and particularly the citizenship issue has been a priority with many First Nations. In terms of the things that need to get addressed. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Megan, to talk a little bit about the work that you've been involved in and what you see on the bigger picture when you're engaging with your colleagues from the other communities that you participate with. So I'll turn it over to you, Megan. Thank you for coming.
Miigwech, Pat, Miigwech. Good evening, everybody. My name is Megan Goulet. I'm the Director of Governance for Nipissing First Nation. Like Pat mentioned, I have been working with Nipissing First Nation regarding our citizenship law development since I began. Oh, Miigwech for who's ever putting that up on the screen. I wasn't sure if I was going to have to share my screen or not. But I'm just going to do a quick presentation. This presentation just really kind of going through the steps of where we've come from and where we're going. Like I mentioned, I've been working with Nipissing now since 2022, give or take, and we've been really focusing in on this citizenship law development. Next slide, please. So Nipissing, like I mentioned, Nipissing First Nation has been taking this approach since about 2018, give or take. Some of this conversation had been brought up through different specific areas relating to citizenship. So we've been engaging our community since then. In addition to engaging our community and consulting them, we've established an ad hoc committee, our citizenship committee, that has been supporting the development of our citizenship law. And in partnership with our citizenship committee and in these consultations, we've been collecting this information, and through that, the committee developed what we're calling our core core principles. And this feedback was really important to ensure that the committee understood what our community wants to see in our citizenship law, what are the commonalities and what our community was saying. So we developed these the committee, sorry, developed these core principles, and I'll go into them into the next slide. We have 10 core principles, and one of the reasons why we developed these core principles is not only to capture what our community has said, but it's an element that has helped us and the committee guide the development of our laws. And they're more of like a high level statement to define our purpose and our values that we're hoping to achieve through our law. Again, it's a lens for making decisions on what should and should not be in. And like I mentioned, this was all developed through community engagement over the last couple of years. The first 4 that we have here is all current NFN members will be citizens under our new Debendagazawad Naknagawin, so our new citizenship law. The purpose of it is to identify those who are entrusted with providing the protection, strength, and future of our nation. Debendagazawads are expected to respect our laws, teachings, help one another, promote unity, learn our culture, and respect the 7 grandfather teachings. All applicants with at least one parent who is an NFN member will be a citizen under the new law. So that was one thing that we really have been focusing on, is that one parent rule. So if there is a current member of NFN, their children or their children will be considered a citizen just based on that one parent rule. Next slide. And then this is just a couple more core principles that are supporting this as we go on. All applications entitled to have membership with NFN prior to our citizenship law being created will be entitled to be registered as citizens under the new one. A commitment to NFN culture and language is an important component. Minor children adopted by a band member in accordance with our NFN custom adoptions or through a court order will be recognized as an NFN member. There was one specific element as well, those Ndawad. So those, to us, that means those who live among us. So non-member spouses, stepchildren. We're not really focused anymore on like lessees or renters. Those have more of a contractual agreement with NFN through like lease agreements, rental agreements, those sort of things. So they don't particularly apply with our citizenship law. We're more concerned about like non-member spouses and non-member stepchildren. And then those last 2 bullet points are our committees that we're looking to establish through our citizenship law that will support recommendations to chief and council if that's the direction we're taking. We're still working on the first little bit of our citizenship law, our citizenships, eligibility, and DAWA. Those are our key focuses right now for our law. Next slide. One of the key things that I want to note through the process that we've been doing through this development process is Maknagan. So Nipissing First Nation is a signatory to the ANGA, so the Anishinaabe Nation Governance Agreement. And with being a signatory and having this ANGA ratified, it created Maknagan. So Maknagan, for those that may not know, is the organizational body that was established when the ANGA was ratified. And they've been supporting the signatory First Nations with advocacy, information development, tool development, and more specifically, more recently, is that they've supported the First Nations with a citizenship law template. They've hired legal resources, outside legal resources, to develop a template that First Nations the First Nations that are under the ANGA to utilize to adapt to how their First Nations see fit. This has been really crucial in our where we're currently at. We had certain elements. We've done a lot of research on what elements should be included into our citizenship law, but this really supported our committee in seeing kind of like a tangible element to our citizenship law. Like this is what it could potentially look like. So now what we're doing with our committee is we're breaking down the elements of this template law and looking at our core principles, the information that we've collected, and where we could put those particular elements into this template law, and what elements don't necessarily work for Nipissing First Nation. So it's been really helpful, and we've been working with I've been working with Maknagan to get more resources to support our citizenship law development as we move forward. One other important element that I want to note is that there is what's called the Intergovernmental Forum, and this is a part of ANGA and something that is very important because some of the issues that we're seeing and hearing as we go through these community consultations for citizenship development or citizenship law development is that there's concerns around, well, what does that mean about status? What does that mean about the non-insured health benefits? What does it mean? What does that mean for us for the resources that I think in our view anyways is that the Canada has a fiduciary responsibility to still. So this intergovernmental forum provides an opportunity for the signatory First Nations like ourselves and Canada and Maknagan to sit at the table to discuss these higher level governance discussions. And so I know from my understanding, Maknagan is in the process now. They have all new staff in there and building the organization. And so now they're looking at in the near future to establish that intergovernmental forum to start beginning to have these conversations. Like I mentioned, some of the concerns that we have. So at NFN, we're going to be undertaking some studies and looking at the population increases and what that means for our First Nation. What's the projection of how many members we can expect, and so that will help us, make better decisions about our resources, our programs, and our policies, and all those things moving forward. But once we get that information, it'll better support our discussions at that intergovernmental forum. So some of the components that we're working on right now, obviously the purpose, our eligibility criteria, which is just a one-parent rule, the Ndawad criteria, the rights and benefits of our citizens, the privileges of Ndawad, looking at our adoption rules currently and what else we want to include, including also ceremonial practices, appeal processes, citizenship committee, and application processes. So the bottom ones are more of a process, but we're really more concerned right now with that numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. What does it mean for our citizenship? What are the rights and what are the rights of our citizens? And what are the privileges of Ndawad? And how do we include that into our citizenship law? What does that look like? So we're really trying to get that information, research more information, and that's where we've kind of but went to Maknagan to ask for some more additional support on information that they can potentially find going elsewhere with other First Nations and what they've done. Next slide. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That was a quick slideshow. But pretty much we're in the process right now of really developing those elements of our citizenship law. And what's really been a huge support is that Maknagan support and how the information that they're providing and where they're going and the strategic plan that where they're going towards. So we're really at the point right now is really getting into our community, talking about what the citizenship law means, developing a template law that would have kind of like a bone structure, but we're adding more meat to it to provide to our community as a tangible element when we're talking about our citizenship law. What does this mean? What does this look like? What are the elements that are going to be included? So that's where we're working towards right now, is to fill in those blanks to be able to provide more information to our community as we go forward. But there's a lot going on with Nipissing.
Thank you, Megan. Exciting work that's going on over there at Nipissing First Nation, and I know the collaboration and information sharing you're having with the other communities through the Maknagan process is very beneficial to each community to share those good practices and good ideas. So I'm going to open up any questions or comments at this time. Yes, Lake Huron Regional Chief Scott McLeod.
Miigwech, Pat, and miigwech, Megan. That was very well done. The one thing I just want to distinguish here that Nipissing has, because Nipissing is a bit ahead of a lot of the First Nations on the citizenship law, and we've done a lot of work and head scratching on how we're going to do this. And I spoke earlier at the beginning of the complexities of this. And the one thing that I just want to clarify that Megan was talking about, she was making a distinction between Endawad and Deben Dodswad. So because and there's different dialects there, but we're using the Nipissing one. But there's those who belong, which was talked about in the statement that was we went over the draft statement, but what we've recognized in Nipissing is that citizenship is very complicated, and citizenship doesn't translate to a banned list or doesn't distinguish any rights. So one of the issues that we came up with was we have citizens that are not First Nation, but they are a part, they belong with us. We didn't want to say that they don't belong. So that became a bit of a challenge on how do you include those spouses that are not Indigenous, adoptions perhaps, or extended families, blended families. So we didn't want to exclude them, but we just can't simply transfer rights to them. So there's two different categories of our citizens, and we didn't want it also to be one where, you know, we're creating classes of citizens. But we had to maintain the integrity of being Anishinaabe. So one is your citizens who are Anishinaabe, and two are your citizens who are part of our communities and part of our nation, but don't necessarily carry any rights and don't necessarily aren't necessarily Anishinaabe. So that's where it becomes really complex, because then you have to look at things like what kind of services do you know, the spouses and extended family get, as opposed to, you know, those services as a band member or as a citizen with rights. So you can see how that quickly gets really complicated, in the sense of, you know, you're providing education for your membership currently, but when you make citizenship, are you giving education funding to all citizens? And the answer with Nipissing was, well, no, we can't. You know, it's for those that are Anishinaabe. I just to highlight, you know, the differences that Megan was referencing, and the complexities that First Nations are going to get into when they start making these citizenship laws. Miigwech.
Yeah, thank you for that, Scott. And I think you know, that really outlines the very robust discussion that's going to have to occur in each community. You know, just when you think you've heard all of the different scenarios, something's going to come up, you know, right out of left field, that you'll have to grapple with. And let's not be afraid of that. I think that's why it's important that when Marcia talked about, you know, let's not practice exclusion. Let's try to find ways, you know, and obviously there's going to be different circumstances, but, you know, we shouldn't be trying to, you know, have a real checkerboard citizenship law amongst our Anishinaabe communities, but, you know, there have to be some very basic principles, you know, for everyone. But again, there's individual characteristics that are going to have to apply, you know, that only you as individual citizens of your First Nations, you know, have the answers to, because it's your community, it's your way, you're the ones that are making the law. And that's how important that is. So we've only got about a minute left. Was there any other questions in the chat, Dave? Was there any other questions in the chat?
No, there wasn't.
Okay, again, for anybody that thinks of something later, it was flashed on the screen there very quickly, but it's Laurent Mary. What did I do with that? I lost it myself. Give me a second here. Where is it? Can you put that back up on the screen, the contact for anybody that comes up with a question again? After the session's over for the night?
Yes, it's on there, Pat.
Okay,
It's,
thank you. I'm not getting that on the screen here. So I want to thank all of you citizens from the Lake Huron region. It's a very important matter, and I'm glad you took the time out in your busy schedules to spend a couple hours with us. These talks are not over. As I said in my opening address, the declaration is a higher priority right now that we hope to have a finalized declaration by this summer's Grand Council in June. There's regional meetings coming up all through the month of April where this thing will be vetted. But in each community, you still have an opportunity to have any input. But the talks that are going to happen on your citizenship law, they're going to take time. They're so, as has been pointed out, there's lots of complicated scenarios that have to be addressed, and it's very important that we really have a very robust discussion, because at the end of the day, we have to come up with something that is going to work for all of us. So with that, I thank everyone for participating, all the presenters and all the folks that tuned in. Miigwech, you have a great evening. And Donna, could you close us off, please?
Yes. Mr. Jikwe Miigwech de Vinjet. Miigwech Ananike Misanik Misham Sinaniki Nagibit Gobiek. Give us in Dutch cake. Miigwech Ananike Wadin Kitagi Chekeshik Chinakiat. Can you get washing the women update? Minogi when the government in Dutch get chicken, no Miigwech chalk. And that 9 Kitagi. Miigwech kidding. Miigwech.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Mawampi.
Won't be.